The scream tore through the 42nd floor at 2 a.m. Raw, animal, the kind of sound that came from somewhere deeper than fear. Nancy Morrison abandoned her cleaning cart and ran toward the glass conference room, her heart hammering against ribs that remembered another scream, another child, 7 years ago. Inside, 8-year-old Kathryn Stanley was destroying everything. Papers flew like snow. A lamp shattered against marble. The little girl's hands bled from punching the window, her face blank with methodical violence that would have terrified anyone else. But Nancy had seen this before, in her own mirror. Every morning for 7 years, she didn't knock, didn't announce herself. Just opened the door, stepped inside, and sat down on the cold floor. Kathryn froze, chest heaving, a bronze sculpture raised above her head like a weapon. Their eyes met, Millionaire's daughter and invisible janitor, and something passed between them. Recognition. The kind only the broken can see in each other. Nancy reached into her pocket and pulled out a square of white paper. Her hands, calloused from mops and grief, began to fold. Valley fold, mountain fold, creating something from nothing while the girl watched. "When I'm scared," Nancy said softly, not looking up, "I fold. Helps my hands remember they can make things instead of break things." Kathryn lowered the sculpture, slowly, like someone waking from a nightmare into a stranger dream. What Harold Stanley didn't know, what no one in that Chicago high-rise knew, was that his daughter's janitor wasn't just any woman hiding behind a mop. She was a former crisis negotiator who'd failed to save her own daughter from a kidnapper 7 years ago, the same kidnapper who'd just tried to take Kathryn. And when Harold finally discovered the truth, when he saw the security footage and read the police reports, when he understood exactly who had been saving his daughter in the dead of night, he would stand frozen in his office, unable to breathe. Because some angels wear uniforms, and some warriors clean floors at 2 a.m., waiting for one more chance at redemption. Before Nancy's story unfolds, I need you to do something. Look at the person who cleans your office, the janitor in your building, the invisible workers you pass without seeing. One of them might be carrying a story that could break your heart. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, your city, your state, your country, and let me know if this story resonates with you. And subscribe if you want more stories that remind us. Heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes they wear uniforms and carry mops. Now, let me tell you what happened on the 42nd floor. At 2 a.m., while Chicago's elite slept in penthouses, a woman in a janitor's uniform did the impossible. She calmed the Millionaire's violent, traumatized daughter with nothing but paper cranes and silence. But when Harold Stanley discovered who this night janitor really was, when he learned what connected her to his daughter's nightmare, he would stand frozen in his office, staring at security footage, unable to breathe, because Nancy wasn't just any janitor. She was the crisis counselor who'd failed to save her own daughter from a kidnapper 7 years ago, the same kidnapper who'd tried to take Kathryn. Harold Stanley sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching dawn break over Lake Michigan. He hadn't slept in 3 days. The latest email from Dr. Brennan, Kathryn's 5th psychologist in 3 months, glowed on his screen. "I'm sorry, Mr. Stanley. I cannot continue treating your daughter. She requires institutional care beyond my scope." Behind him, through the glass wall, Kathryn slept fitfully on the leather couch in the adjacent conference room, her small body curled like a question mark. 3 months ago, a man had approached her outside her private school, whispering things that still made her scream in the night. Security had intervened. The man had vanished. But Kathryn hadn't come back. She raged at therapists, destroyed furniture, refused to eat. Yesterday, she'd thrown a paperweight at Dr. Brennan's head. Harold had tried everything. Residential treatment centers that looked like luxury resorts, medication cocktails that turned her into a zombie, behavioral specialists who treated her like a lab experiment. Nothing worked, and the guilt ate him alive. He'd been in a merger meeting when it happened, his phone on silent, while his daughter faced a monster alone. Now he worked nights, kept her close, and watched her fade. The city woke below him, indifferent and gleaming. He closed his eyes and wondered how much longer he could hold on. Nancy Morrison pushed her cleaning cart through the marble lobby at 10 p.m. sharp, exactly as she had for the past 8 months. The wheels squeaked softly. a rhythm she'd grown to love because it was the only sound in a building built to amplify success. She wore her Navy uniform like armor, her graying hair pulled back tight, her eyes down. Invisible. That's what she'd become, and that's what she needed to be. The day shift workers never saw her. The executives didn't know her name. She was a ghost who polished their achievements and emptied their trash. In her cart, beneath the spray bottles and microfiber cloths, she kept three things that didn't belong: a worn copy of Crisis Negotiation, Theory and Practice, a faded photograph she never looked at anymore, and 17 origami cranes she'd folded during lunch breaks. She'd started folding them after Emma died, 7 years ago, when her 6-year-old daughter had been taken from a playground, while Nancy was 3 blocks away, negotiating a hostage situation at a bank. By the time she'd gotten the call, by the time she'd raced to the scene and tried to use every technique she'd ever learned, it was too late. Emma was gone, and Nancy had folded her first crane in the hospital waiting room, her hands shaking so badly she'd had to start over 11 times. She'd quit the police force the next day, disappeared, became someone who couldn't fail because no one expected anything. But tonight, as she rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, she saw Kathryn through the glass walls. The little girl sat bolt upright on a couch, eyes wide and haunted, staring at nothing. And Nancy recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 7 years. The scream hit Nancy before she'd even pushed her cart off the elevator. Raw, animal, the kind of sound that came from somewhere deeper than fear. She abandoned the cart and moved toward the glass conference room. Inside, Kathryn was destroying everything. Papers flew like snow. A lamp shattered. The little girl moved with methodical violence, her face blank, her hands bleeding from where she'd punched the window. Nancy didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply opened the door, stepped inside, and sat down on the floor. Kathryn froze, chest heaving, a bronze sculpture raised above her head. Nancy reached into her pocket and pulled out a square of white paper. She began to fold. Valley fold, mountain fold. Her hands moved with practiced precision, creating something from nothing while the girl watched. "When I'm scared," Nancy said softly, not looking up, "I fold. Helps my hands remember they can make things instead of break things." Kathryn lowered the sculpture. Slowly, like someone waking from a dream, she sat down. Nancy finished the crane, set it gently on the floor between them, and pulled out another square of paper. She held it out. Kathryn's bloody fingers trembled as she took it. For 20 minutes, they sat in silence. Kathryn's folds were clumsy, angry, but Nancy didn't correct her. She just kept folding her own cranes, one after another, until the destroyed room looked like a strange garden where paper birds bloomed from chaos. When Harold finally found them, racing in with security behind him, Kathryn was holding a misshapen crane to her chest. Her eyes were closed. She was breathing normally. "Who are you?" Harold whispered. Nancy stood, gathering her cranes. "Just the janitor, sir." "I heard a noise," but Kathryn grabbed her hand. "Stay." It was the first word she'd spoken in 2 weeks. The pattern started the next night. Kathryn refused to sleep until Nancy arrived. At 10 p.m., the little girl would position herself by the elevator, origami paper clutched in both hands, waiting. Nancy would finish her initial rounds, then sit with her in the conference room. No words about therapy. No questions about feelings. Just paper and patience. "This crane looks broken," Nancy would say, holding up a deliberately crumpled fold. "But see, I can unfold it, start again, nothing's ruined forever." Kathryn began talking on the 3rd night. Small things at first. "I hate vegetables. My mom used to braid my hair." Then bigger things. "The man who tried to take me, he smelled like cigarettes and mint. He said I was going to help him with something special." Nancy's hands stopped folding, just for a second, but she didn't press. "Did you tell the police?" "They didn't believe me, said I was confused." "I believe you," Nancy said, and Kathryn's shoulders dropped like she'd been holding up a building. Harold watched it all through security cameras. His initial relief had turned to confusion, then to something like jealousy. His daughter, who screamed when he tried to hug her, curled up next to a janitor like a cat seeking warmth. At her last therapy session, Dr. Morrison from Northwestern had noted, remarkable improvement in affect regulation and sleep patterns. But when Harold mentioned Nancy, the doctor frowned. Unorthodox, potentially problematic. She has no credentials. But credentials hadn't saved his daughter. Paper cranes had. One night, Kathryn looked up at Nancy. "Why do you work here? At night, I mean, alone." Nancy folded a wing carefully before answering. "Because darkness is honest. In daylight, people pretend. At night, we can be what we really are." "What are you really?" Kathryn asked. Nancy's voice was barely a whisper. "Broken, like your cranes, but still here." Harold couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the question burning through his mind. Who was this woman? He started with the security footage, watching weeks of recordings. Nancy arrived precisely at 10 p.m. every night, left at 6 a.m. She cleaned with meditative slowness, never took breaks, never used her phone. And every time she passed Kathryn's conference room, even before their first encounter, she would pause, just for a moment, like she was praying. He ran a background check. Nancy Morrison, 48 years old. Current address, modest apartment in Rogers Park. Previous employment, janitor at 3 different buildings over the past 6 years. Before that, nothing. He called a friend who owed him a favor. The deep dive came back at 3 a.m. Harold sat in his dark office, reading the file with hands that shook. Nancy Morrison, former crisis negotiator, Chicago Police Department. Specialized in hostage situations and child abduction cases. Excellent record. Resigned August 2018. And then the newspaper articles loaded. Tragedy strikes close to home. Crisis counselor's daughter among missing. Body of Emma Morrison, 6, found after 3-week search. Police counselor quits force after daughter's death. Kidnapper still at large. The photo showed a younger Nancy, hollow-eyed at a press conference, barely holding herself together. Harold read every article twice. Emma had been taken from a playground. Nancy had been working a bank hostage situation 3 blocks away. By the time she'd arrived at the scene, by the time she'd tried to negotiate, tried to use every skill she possessed, her daughter was already gone. The kidnapper had never been caught. Nancy had disappeared from public records 6 months after the funeral, until now. Until she'd emerged as a night janitor, invisible by choice, carrying origami cranes and secrets. Harold stared at his computer screen until dawn, understanding finally washing over him. She hadn't been hiding from the world. She'd been hiding from herself, and somehow his broken daughter had found her anyway. Kathryn's nightmare hit on a Tuesday. She woke screaming at 11 p.m., so violently that Harold couldn't calm her. She clawed at him, shouting words that made no sense. "He said it again! He keeps saying it!" Nancy was in the building, 2 floors down. She heard it through the ventilation system and ran. When she entered the conference room, Kathryn was hyperventilating, her lips turning blue. Harold looked desperate, helpless. Nancy knelt down slowly, not touching. "Kathryn, what did he say?" The little girl's eyes were wild. "You're going to help me with something special." That's what he whispered, right before he tried to take me. "You're going to help me with something special." The words hit Nancy like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled. Her ears rang. Because those were the exact words found in Emma's diary. The exact words the kidnapper had said to her daughter before. She stood abruptly, her professional mask cracking. "I need to make a call." Harold followed her into the hallway. "What's wrong?" Nancy's hands trembled as she pulled out a phone she rarely used, dialing a number she'd sworn she'd never call again. "Detective Ramirez, it's Nancy Morrison. I need to reopen my daughter's case. I think he tried again." Meanwhile, inside the building, Harold's HR director sent an urgent email. Concerning unauthorized relationship between contract employee and executive's daughter. Recommend immediate termination pending investigation. Harold's phone buzzed. He looked at the message, then at Nancy standing in the hallway, finally facing her past, then at Kathryn, who'd stopped screaming only when Nancy entered the room. The choice was simple. The right answer was impossible. "Tell HR to wait," he said quietly. Nancy hung up, turned to face him, her eyes red. "Mr. Stanley, there's something you need to know." Midnight. The office building empty except for the 3 of them. Nancy sat across from Harold in his office while Kathryn slept in the conference room, finally calm after her breakthrough. The city glittered below them, indifferent to the confession about to unfold. "My daughter's name was Emma," Nancy began, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "She was 6 years old, loved dinosaurs, could name every planet in order. I was a crisis negotiator, one of the best. I'd talked down armed suspects, saved hostages, diffused situations that should have ended in bloodshed." She paused, gathering strength. "The day Emma was taken, I was 3 blocks away. A bank hostage situation. My phone was on silent because you can't negotiate with distractions. By the time someone reached me, by the time I got to the playground, she was already gone." Harold listened without interrupting. "For 3 weeks, I used every technique I knew, every contact, every method. The kidnapper never called, never demanded ransom, and then they found her body in a warehouse near the docks." Nancy's hands twisted in her lap. "At her funeral, I realized something. I'd saved strangers' children for 15 years, but I couldn't save my own. So I quit, disappeared, became someone who couldn't fail because no one needed me." "Why did you come back?" Harold asked gently. "I didn't. Not really. Janitorial work isn't coming back. It's hiding in plain sight. You can't disappoint people who don't see you." She met his eyes. "But then I saw Kathryn. And I recognized that look, that hollow, haunted thing in her eyes. The same look I saw in the mirror every morning." Harold leaned forward. "I know the cases match. The whispered phrase, the approach pattern." Nancy nodded. "I called my former partner. He's checking. But Mr. Stanley, if it's the same man, then my daughter survived what yours didn't." Harold's voice cracked. "And you saved her anyway." "I couldn't save Emma," Nancy whispered, "but Kathryn found me. And maybe that's what Emma would have wanted. Maybe that's why I'm still here." Harold stood, moved to the window. "HR wants you terminated. Lawyers are worried about liability. Investors think I'm distracted." He turned to face her. "But I don't care, because you gave my daughter back to me when no one else could." "Then let me help you find him," Nancy said. "Let me finish what I started 7 years ago." The pieces came together faster than anyone expected. Detective Ramirez pulled Emma's old case file and compared it with Kathryn's incident report. The similarities were chilling. Same whispered phrase. Same approach pattern outside schools. Same type of vehicle spotted nearby. A gray van with tinted windows. Within a week, they had a suspect. Marcus Webb, 52, worked as a custodian for Chicago Public Schools. He'd been at Emma's school 7 years ago, recently transferred to the district where Kathryn attended. Background check revealed sealed juvenile records. A restraining order from a former girlfriend. Gaps in employment that aligned with other missing children cases. Nancy sat in the police station, looking at his photo, and felt her blood turn to ice. "That's him. I saw him at Emma's school. He was always there, always watching." Detective Ramirez leaned forward. "We need more for an arrest. Can Kathryn identify him?" Harold wanted to say no. Wanted to protect his daughter from reliving the trauma, but Nancy touched his hand gently. "She needs this. Needs to know she can face him and survive." They did it carefully, shown 6 photos, no pressure. Kathryn's finger trembled as it pointed to Marcus Webb. "That's him. That's the man." The police moved fast. Surveillance. Search warrant. But Marcus was smarter than they had thought. He'd been watching the investigation. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, he made his move. Kathryn was leaving her new school, smaller, private, supposedly safer. Harold was running late in traffic. Security was changing shifts. And Marcus walked right up to her, his hand reaching for her arm. "Remember me? You were going to help me with something special." But Nancy was there. She'd been following Kathryn for weeks, invisible in her old sedan, unable to shake the fear that he'd return. She moved faster than she had in years, her training flooding back. "Kathryn, run!" The little girl bolted toward the school. Marcus turned, recognized Nancy, smiled. "You, the mother who failed. Want to fail again?" Nancy didn't respond, just positioned herself between him and Kathryn, her phone already dialing 911. "It's over, Marcus." He lunged. And that's when Harold arrived, screeching into the parking lot, witnessing Nancy tackle a man twice her size. Using crisis negotiation, hold she'd sworn she'd never use again, protecting his daughter with a ferocity born from 7 years of grief. He froze. Not from fear, from recognition. This woman, this invisible janitor he'd barely noticed, was a warrior, and she'd been saving his daughter all along. The courtroom was packed. Marcus Webb sat in orange jumpsuit, shackled, his eyes cold as Nancy took the stand. She'd avoided this moment for 7 years, avoided cameras, reporters, the public dissection of her failure. But now, with Kathryn sitting beside Harold in the front row, Nancy spoke clearly. He took my daughter Emma in 2018, used the same methods, the same words. And he almost took Harold Stanley 3 months ago. The prosecutor asked gentle questions. Nancy answered each one, her voice never wavering, even when she described finding Emma's body. When they showed photos of the origami cranes found in Marcus's apartment, sick trophies from children he'd watched, Nancy closed her eyes but didn't cry. The defense tried to discredit her. Ms. Morrison, isn't it true you abandoned your law enforcement career? That you were deemed unfit for duty? Nancy met the lawyer's eyes. I left because I couldn't save my own child. But that guilt taught me something about trauma that no credential ever could. It taught me how to recognize pain, how to sit with it, how to heal it. By cleaning offices? The lawyer sneered. By being present, Nancy replied. By showing up every night for a little girl who needed someone who understood. Not someone with a degree on the wall, but someone who'd survived the same nightmare. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Emma's murder. 2 other abductions. Attempted kidnapping of Kathryn. Life without parole. As they led Marcus away, he looked at Nancy. She stared back, unafraid. When the courtroom emptied, Harold approached her. I've created something. The Emma Foundation. For child trauma recovery. I want you to direct it. Nancy shook her head. I'm not ready for that. Then be ready, Kathryn said, suddenly beside her. Because I need you. And so do other kids. Nancy knelt down, eye to eye with the little girl who'd saved her as much as she'd saved Kathryn. Okay, she whispered, for Emma and for you. 6 months later, the Emma Foundation opened in a renovated brownstone on Chicago's north side. The walls were painted soft blues and greens. Origami cranes hung from the ceiling like hope taking flight. Nancy stood at the entrance in clothing she still wasn't comfortable with, slacks and a blouse instead of her uniform. Around her neck, a silver necklace with the letter E. Inside, children who'd survived trauma worked with counselors trained in Nancy's methods. Not clinical, not cold, just present. Harold had spared no expense, but more importantly, he'd given her complete control. This is yours, he'd said. Build it the way Emma would have wanted. The opening ceremony drew media attention Nancy had avoided for years, but Kathryn insisted she speak. People need to hear your story. Nancy stood at the microphone, hands shaking, looking at the crowd. Survivors, parents, professionals. Kathryn in the front row, holding a paper crane. My daughter Emma loved building things, Nancy began. Towers, bridges, dreams. After she died, I stopped building, started hiding. Became invisible because visibility meant failure could find me again. She paused. But a little girl sat beside me one night and asked me to teach her to fold paper. And in teaching her, she taught me something. That broken things can be unfolded, started over, made new. Her voice strengthened. This foundation isn't about forgetting trauma. It's about honoring it, about sitting with broken children and showing them they can build again. Not despite what happened, but because of it. The crowd stood. Nancy stepped back, overwhelmed. Kathryn ran up, threw her arms around her. You did it. You're not invisible anymore. That evening, after everyone left, Nancy stood alone in the foundation's main room. She pulled out the old photograph she'd carried for 7 years. Emma, age 5, grinning with a missing front tooth. I couldn't save you, Nancy whispered, but because of you, I'm saving others. And maybe that's what you'd want. Maybe that's why I survived. She placed the photo on a shelf beside a cluster of origami cranes Kathryn had made. 2 daughters, 7 years apart, connected by tragedy and healing. Outside, Harold waited by his car. Kathryn ran ahead, but he lingered. Thank you, he said to Nancy. For what? for not staying invisible, for letting my daughter find you, for teaching both of us what healing actually looks like. Nancy smiled, genuinely, for the first time in years. She saved me too. As they walked toward the car together, the setting sun caught the cranes in the window, casting bird-shaped shadows across the sidewalk. And somewhere, in the space between grief and hope, redemption unfolded. One paper crane, one saved child, one invisible woman made visible at a time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications.